Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today for our author talk with Michelle Young. She's here to talk about her new book, The Art Spy. I'm Katie Peace. I'm the Director of Communications for the Preservation League of New York State. And I want to say thank you to our program sponsor, the Peggy Ann and Roger G. Gary Charitable Trust, who underwrite all of our Preservation Book Club programming. So if you've made your way to this webinar but are not familiar with the Preservation League, we are a statewide nonprofit and we empower all New Yorkers to use historic preservation to enrich their communities, protect their heritage, and build a sustainable future. We do that all sorts of ways all over New York State, including providing grants. We advocate for preservation at the local, state, and federal level. We provide technical assistance and collaborate with colleagues across the state. We award excellence and draw attention to at-risk historic sites, and we also offer virtual programs like this one. So the reason that we are here today is to talk about this great new book, The Art Spy, written by Michelle. It's a riveting and stylish saga set in Paris during World War II. The Art Spy uncovers how an unlikely heroine infiltrated the Nazi leadership to save the world's most treasured masterpieces. And it is quite an adventure. So if you have not read it yet, I think after today's presentation, you will be inspired to. Michelle Young is an award-winning journalist, author, and professor whose writing on looted and lost art has appeared in Hyperallergic, The Forward, The Wilson Quarterly. She's a graduate of Harvard College in the history of art and architecture and holds a master's degree from Columbia University's Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation, where she is professor of architecture. She's the founder of Untapped New York and an online magazine about New York City's secrets and hidden places. And she's also the author of Secret Brooklyn, Secret New York, An Unusual Guide, Secret New York, Hidden Bars and Restaurants, and Broadway. You could find her online and follow her to see what she's up to at Michelle Young Writer and at her website, michelleyoungwriter.com. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle to tell us all about Rose Valland and her amazing adventures saving art in Paris.
Got into the story of Rose Valland because I was reading almost exclusively books about World War II. And that is because of my own family's history. My grandfather survived the atomic bomb in Hiroshima as a Taiwanese student. And then my husband's two grandfathers were War Cross awardees fighting for de Gaulle in World War II. And so I came across Rose in this book, A Goring's Man in Paris by Jonathan Petropoulos. And it is the story of Hermann Goring's personal art dealer, who was the real nemesis of Rose Valland throughout the war. He was assigned to the same museum that she was working undercover in, and they hated each other really through the end of their lives. And if you haven't heard of Rose Valland before, possibly you may have heard of her in the movie Monuments Man. It's a Hollywoodized version of the story of the Monuments Men. And a character based on her, though not named after her, appears in the book, played by Cate Blanchett. And although the outlines of the story are accurate, it is about the story of the effort to save the artwork in France as the Allies were going to liberate the countries that Germany had occupied. They do change some details about Rose, including that she was straight and not lesbian. So we will get more into Rose's personal life in a minute. But even if you haven't seen Monuments Men, you may have heard of the movie The Train or seen this movie with Burt Lancaster. And it was actually optioned off of Rose's own memoir that she published in 1961. And it is a very fun caper film, but a character, again, named after someone else, but inspired by Rose, appears in the first 5 minutes of the film and jumpstarts the action to come. So to start from the very beginning, as a trained urban planner and teaching architecture at GSAPP, for me, the combination of my journalism work and architecture work is how I operate. And the first thing I always do with any project is to go in person on site to where the story takes place. And so I showed up in Rose Valland's hometown called Saint-Étienne-de-Saint-Joire the summer of 2021, about 5 months after I discovered her. I spend every summer in France with my family and my two daughters. And I just wanted to get a sense whether there was a story here. And that's what you get from going in person. So what I learned is, well, first, Saint-Étienne-de-Saint-Joire is a small countryside village about 40 miles southeast of Lyon. You can kind of see here with even this little one photograph that A lot of it dates to the medieval period. There are castles and really medieval style buildings that bear the signs of the religious wars that took place in this region. This is the area of many Catholic martyrs, many battles. And what I learned going to Rose's hometown is that there are some places named after her. One is this place called Place Rosevalent. Place in French really means plaza or square. But it is unfortunately the post office's parking lot. And so, when you go in person to report, in one way, I joked that I found out everything I needed to know. We needed to get Rose really out of the parking lot. But I also went to the town hall to ask some questions. I wanted to know, where did she live? Where is her house? I have a photograph of it, but where is it? And where is she buried? I know that she's buried in town, but I've been to all 4 cemeteries and I didn't find her. And surprisingly, inside they told me, well, we actually don't know too much about Rose. But here is the phone number to the woman who runs the Rose Vallon Association. And this became a critical contact in my project. The woman who runs it, Jacqueline Bartolet, is a real firecracker and opened up the doors to everything I needed to tell the story in France, and grew to trust me as I trusted her to tell Rose's true story. And so here I am, very pregnant that year, but I did find Rose's house and a friendly cat. And I also did find where she's buried. So Rose Valland, who is she? She is born in 1898 at the end of the 19th century. Her father is a blacksmith who's taken over the forge that belongs to her mother's family. And the forge is attached to their house. So you can imagine the world she's grown up with. I've shown you or talked to you about the religious milieu that she's in. This is a rural area, although it has a pretty robust town. And here is this forge attached to the house where she could hear iron clanging, soot falling. And this is the world she grows up in. It's not the happiest childhood. And she has an older brother, but he dies at a very, very young age. And then here is where she's buried. This is the family vault. And there is a plaque there now from the Association de la Mémoire de Rose Valland, the Rose Valland Association. So, like I mentioned, born in 1898 and really has an unlikely rise to the pinnacle of the arts world. Someone of her background, not from Paris, from the working class, would not have been expected to be educated at all. But her mother was very intent on making sure that Rose was educated. She saw her early talents in school, in the arts, and applied diligently for Rose to go to better and better schools, which meant she began living further and further away as she went from boarding school to high school, which was in Grenoble at the Teachers College there. In France, college means high school. And then finally, not finally, but then next to the École des Beaux-Arts in Lyon, where she wins awards from the school level all the way to the national level. And then she gets into the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. So this is a school where all of the major French history painters have all attended. It is really the pinnacle of the arts world. So she goes to Paris in the 1920s. It's a very difficult test to get into the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. It's a 40-hour test. This includes drawing from live nudes, architectural drawings, you name it. And she ends up placing 6th. Also in the 1920s, you can see her experimenting with a boy haircut. She's wearing, not in this picture, but she likes to wear suits. She's really mixing and hobnobbing with the avant-garde in Paris. In the late 20s, she meets the woman who becomes her life partner, Joyce Here, pictured here. Joyce is a British citizen, but half German. Her father is German, and she ends up spending her middle school and high school years in Germany, and then is sent to Paris to finishing school and also to attend the Sorbonne. And it is at this finishing school that Rose meets Joyce, because Rose is her French teacher. So on the personal side, this is one of the big discoveries. And I spent actually 3 months digging into Joyce because she's not a public figure. It can be hard to find information. And so I treated her like a missing persons case and dug into every possible mundane document I could find about her. And the real clue that opened up everything was that she worked for the US Embassy. And so I could take advantage of the US archives here and find her whole educational and employment file. And the fact that Joyce speaks German and is half German becomes a critical part to Rose's story. So this is Joyce in the 1930s as she begins to work at the US Embassy in Paris. So back to Rose's education. She's had an almost unbelievable rise and success going into Paris. And she's not only going to the École des Beaux-Arts, but she is taking classes at the Sorbonne, at the École du Louvre, at the École des Hautes Études. So she eventually graduates with the equivalent of multiple graduate degrees. But unfortunately, at the École du Louvre, she meets her first nemesis. And this man is Henri Verne, pictured here. And Henri Verne is not only the head of the Louvre, École du Louvre, but the head of the Louvre itself and the head of all the French national museums in the country. This is a network of many, many organizations and museums. And he has taken a dislike to her and is unfortunately also her thesis advisor. And so he sinks her thesis, saying that it is not considered art history. And I'm going to share with you the name of her thesis because I read through it, 125 pages of her thesis. And it is the study of movement in Italian art from the Renaissance to the present day at the time. And so this is nothing out of bounds of art history today, but it was considered that then because art history was thought to be the study of only static images. So the idea that you would consider even movement within a painting or a fresco was too much for Henri Verne. But I think the other reason is that he was a man who came from the right social class in France, but he was not trained in art at all. So by the time he retired in 1939, he was still teaching 19 art courses at the École du Louvre. And to me, this was to prove that he was a real connoisseur in the art. He had studied law and made his way up in the civil service and became in charge of the French museums, but was not an artist at all. And so because he gives her a bad grade on her thesis, this sinks her chances of getting a job at the Louvre, where he's in charge, and other places, because anytime someone writes a letter to inquire about her candidacy for certain jobs, Henri Verne goes at great lengths to explain why she should not be hired, why the job should not exist at all, and details about her thesis, and that she only graduated, quote, with the extreme indulgence of the jury, which to me was a dig to the other professors at the school, who it was reported that the school in general thought her thesis was very extraordinary. And so as a result, she takes an unpaid job at the Jeu de Paume Museum. You can see the Louvre here in the background. The Jeu de Paume Museum is the sister museum of the Orangerie, which is on the other side of the Tuileries Gardens, facing the Place de la Concorde in Paris. And this museum was an international art museum, international meaning anything not French. And so they would do exhibitions by country. So there would be the art of Austria, the art of Latvia, the art of China, or exhibitions by specific artists. So there was a Chinese artist that they featured. And in addition, they did a big exhibition with MoMA called 3 Centuries of Modern Art. So Rose worked directly with Alfred Barr, the executive director of MoMA, to program and curate this exhibition. And it was very bold and daring, and it included everything, including painting, sculptures, but also film, photography, and other media. And so this museum was also used by France as a tool of diplomacy. So when there was the Spanish Civil War at its height, they did an exhibition on the art of Catalanian artists. And when the Anschluss happened between Germany taking over Austria, they did an exhibition about Austrian art. So you get a sense of its role in the art world at the time. Every exhibition was really a who's who of the French art world. They all came and was reported in the newspapers. Occasionally, Rose would be mentioned in these newspaper reports, or her name would be included in the exhibition catalogs. But at the same time, she had taken this job really officially as a secretary, not as a curator. And she remained unpaid at this museum for 7 years. It's very difficult to transform your position from secretarial track to curatorial track. So that took 4 years. And then she had to kind of restart what would be equivalent to this unpaid internship period again. And that leads us to World War II, or the onset of World War II. So by 1939, still unpaid, we are in Western Europe, and there's a lot of unrest geopolitically. There's concern that war with Germany will happen again. And Rose is here in this museum working and worried about the future. The museum also has a very robust permanent collection. So there are artworks by Winslow Homer, and these are the actual paintings that were in the collection. Mary Cassatt, Alfred Stevens, as well as Picasso. And just a few photographs of Rose through the years. This is the 1935 at the exhibition of an Argentinian sculptor. And before we get into World War II, I do want to give some background on art in the Third Reich and art for Hitler. Hitler was rejected from the Vienna Art School twice and spent very painful years, in his opinion, in Vienna. He was homeless for a period. He was sleeping on park benches, and he was making what he says was derivative paintings and postcards for tourists. This is the place where he begins to formulate his very virulent anti-Semitic creeds. And this is because he takes a look around and starts to believe that a so-called Jewish cabal is preventing him from achieving his true calling, his true dream, which is to be an artist. But if you have seen Hitler's paintings, you will find them probably fine and passable, but nothing to write home about. And this is a period of avant-garde modernism, and the art schools and the art world is not looking for things that are too representational, and that is an area that Hitler does not understand whatsoever. And so this hatred of modern art becomes tightly woven into Nazi ideology. And starting in the early 1930s, Hitler announces a war against modern art. It's given a catchy phrase called Entartekunst, which translates to degenerate art. And there's an order given to all the German art curators that they have 4 years to get rid of modern art from their collections. At the end of those 4 years, the seizure of art begins. And so the Nazis seize over 16,000 works of art from German museums. What do they do with them? They sell some, they burn some, and they put some on exhibition in this exhibition that you're seeing here called the Entartekunst exhibition. So you can see Hitler on the far right. So this was an exhibition to prove the degeneracy of modern art. They would do things like place artwork side by side with those done in mental asylums to say, see, this is the same type of reasoning and thought that is going into this artwork. They had rooms dedicated to Jewish artists that had signs that said revelation of the Jewish soul. It was pretty dark, but it was also very popular. And so it went on a 2-year, several year tour around the country, and millions of people saw this exhibition. So here are some more photographs from this exhibition, and here it is on tour somewhere in Germany. At the same time, Hitler was intent on showing the German population what great German art was. And so at the same time that the Entartekunst exhibition opened, here was the opening of the House of German Art. And Hitler made a speech there, once again attacking modern artists. And this was the first step of his mission to show what great German art was. But he had another plan, which was to create the largest and greatest museum ever built, and that was called would be called the Führer Museum, and it was going to be in Linz, Austria. So here is Hitler inaugurating the House of German Art. And I mentioned earlier that some of the artwork seized was sold. And so this is a very famous auction in 1939. I dedicate a chapter of this event in my book. So all the artists you can imagine, Picasso, Matisse, etc., on auction here in Lucerne. And some very famous people came to this auction, including Joseph Pulitzer Jr., who bought a Matisse and other paintings from here. But Alfred Barr from MoMA had secretly sent a dealer to buy art on the MoMA's behalf. And so there are 5 paintings in the collection of MoMA that came from this auction. So now we are in 1939, the summer of 1939, and Rose, fortunately, is about to have a new boss. This is Jacques Dojart, the deputy director of the French National Museums and the Louvre. In my opinion, he looks very Humphrey Bogart, Cary Grant-like, and he is not only handsome, but very suave, and also similar to Rose, comes from the working class. So they form an early, strong bond. He realizes she's an operator just like him, and she helps prepare the museums for war. This is a 7-year effort in which they want to make sure that what happened in World War I in France doesn't happen again, in which they only started moving and protecting art when Germany crossed the borders into France. And so here is Jacques after, when he's a little older, sitting in his office at the Louvre. And so the plan is to move art from Paris into the countryside of France. And that is to protect it from potential enemy fire, bombings, not to protect it from German seizures. That's actually not really on their mind. And so this is the network of castles and other locations in which the museums have secured that they can move art to. The main depot is called Chambord. That's, if you can see here in the center in the Loire Valley. And from there, they will move art to other castles, and in some cases, an abbey. And that's where, for example, the Mona Lisa has gone. The Mona Lisa eventually ends up in Loc-Dieu in the south for most of the war. Here are Rose's notes about the protection of art. So she's made a priority list by school of art, by country, of what they should move out here. So you can see some of the paintings I showed: Winslow Homer, Mary Cassatt from the American school. In the Spanish school, we have Picasso, and maybe any art connoisseurs may recognize some other names like Boldini and Alfred Stevens. And 1939 for Rose is, like for everyone else in France, a real up and down. There's many alerts, and then it turns out to be not that serious, and then life goes back to normal. So this is one of Rose's letters to her very close cousin, Marguerite, where she writes, "This Hitler turns out to be very tiring." Rose in her letters could be quite funny, but in person she was a real tough cookie, very serious. And those traits, of course, proved very useful in the war. And just to show you the scale of the protection, this is the custom crate that was built to protect the Mona Lisa, and they all got color custom dots to indicate their importance. And only one painting had 3 dots, 3 red dots, and that was the Mona Lisa. This is the Mona Lisa as it's being unpacked after the war, where it emerged unscathed. But this is the packing of the art. And so you get a sense of scale of how large these crates were, how many paintings were being fit into some of them. And they would take the paintings down from the Louvre, write the name on chalk. So La Joconde is the French name for the Mona Lisa. And then whole galleries were taken over for packing. This is the sculpture gallery, the Daru Gallery in the Louvre. In the back, you can see the Victory of Samothrace, which was moved down very gingerly. The rope was cracking. They weren't sure it was going to make it down that grand staircase. And other artwork in all the museums, if they could be protected on site, they would be protected by sandbags and under vaults they believed would withstand a bombing. So here's a picture of the Venus de Milo on the left, the Victory of Samothrace on the right, being prepared for their custom crates to be built around them. And again, the sense of the scale of the history paintings that were taken down. You can see the guy smoking here, so they weren't really worried about fire. But here is Liberty leading the people, getting moved out of the Louvre. And again, here you get a sense of scale of how large these paintings are. And this is a Rembrandt room in the Louvre after it's been emptied, and the Grand Gallery after all the paintings have been removed. And then truck after truck was taken. So at this point, war alert has begun. War hasn't officially broken out, but they know it's coming. Poland has been invaded. And so every day, two convoys of trucks with many, many trucks in it would leave the Louvre to the Loire Valley. And this is the Chateau de Chambord. And if anyone has a chance to go, I was given a very special tour with the head of patrimony at Chambord. There is an exhibition dedicated to World War II on the roof of the museum. And so here you can see, and inside they have parts of a set of a movie that was filmed there, a French film that included the story of Jewish art looting in France and the Mona Lisa and such and other things. And this is the grand staircase inside the Chateau Chambord. So getting into World War II, and Rose in 1939, she packs the museums up, but then life turns to normal. She stays in Paris. She puts on some more exhibitions. She even acquires a Frida Kahlo painting. It's actually the first Frida Kahlo to be purchased by any major museum in the world. And it's not until June 1940 that the Germans invade France. And then on June 13th, 1940, she gets the memo. She gets a call from Jacques Chagall, her boss, to say, leave the museum immediately. To give you a sense of her personality, she refuses to leave. She writes letters to him and his boss to say that you agree to let me stay here. I'm the only person left in the museum who knows how to protect the art, who knows what the artwork is. And she's sleeping in a straw mattress inside the museum. But he says she needs to leave. This makes sense. He doesn't want her to be in harm's way. And he puts her in charge of moving 150 museum employees and their families out of Paris by boat on the very last night before the Germans arrive at midnight. She goes through a very treacherous way down to the Loire Valley, one of the most exciting chapters for me to write. And I was able to write it because I discovered an unpublished chapter of her book in an archive in France. So I won't give away what happens to her, but it is really straight out of a film. And then she returns to Paris after that harrowing escape as the Germans invade France. And she even says that she is bored in the museum and in France in the summer of 1940. But lo and behold, 3 months later or so, the Germans have requisitioned and have asked permission from the French to take over another space so they can move all the art that they've looted. And I do want to emphasize the scale of the looting in any country, and in particular in France. The Germans would arrive in a country, set up their government, and start looting all at the same time. They already knew in advance where they wanted to get art from. And in France, they had a list of the 15 major art galleries, predominantly run by Jewish art dealers. And they went in with commando units to liquidate all of that. And then once that was done, they started looking for art in private collections, Jewish collections, hidden in homes, in bank vaults, and all over the country. And so they quickly ran out of space at the German embassy in Paris and asked for a new place to move all of their stolen art. So at first, Jacques Chagall gives them 3 rooms in the Louvre, and they quickly fill those up. And so when they ask for more space, he cleverly suggests the Jeu de Paume Museum, which is close enough for him to keep some eye on. And of course, there is someone inside the museum who can keep eyes on what's happening and who may understand some German. And so later he writes that he ordered Mademoiselle Rose Valland to remain at all costs at the Jeu de Paume Museum. And she takes this directive very seriously, as she does all things, and remains here at this museum for the next 4 years at great costs, at risk to her life. And so her job there, ostensibly, is to take care of the building. She's really a glorified custodian who also knows something about art history. She liaisons with the French guards who are still working there. And she is keeping track of what is happening, who's coming in, what are the documents that they're working on, what exhibitions are they hosting, usually for Hermann Goring, who comes in 20 times, but also for lower level art dealers, lower level Nazis, all who come to this museum to go shopping for art and then move that art to Germany. And so what enables her to stay there is an agreement between France and Germany, and she's issued a series of Ausweises, which are in her personal files, and I got to hold. It's quite something to hold these documents, see the Nazi insignia on these documents. And so she's taking copious notes while there. She goes to Jacques Chagall's office every 2 to 3 days to report on what's happening. And so I'm showing here just like a few images of her notes. One on the top left is reporting on a visit from Hermann Goring, and she's talking about exactly what time he stayed, what time he arrived and how long he stayed. In others, she's reporting about a fire that I spent a lot of time researching, where the Nazis burned 500 modern art paintings in the museum. And hopefully we can maybe talk about that in the questions session, but really major event that she spent the rest of her life trying to prove. And I was able to finally find the smoking guns that could prove that it happened. And then the image on the right is the train numbers for the last train of art that she desperately was trying to save. That is the sequence events that is dramatized in the Burt Lancaster film The Train. But the numbers here are the names of the train cars and the train names. So the Nazis were running a very, very systematic professional art looting operation. So when the art would come in, it would be processed. They would photograph everything using a Leica camera in a photo studio that was built in the Jutpom Museum. And then they would fill out pre-formatted index cards that would have everything, including not only the painting, the painter, but where they looted it from. And then the art historians would sign their initials on it, on these documents. And then periodically, pretty frequently, the whole museum would be turned upside down and they would put on a very elaborate art exhibition that would look exactly like a museum exhibition, but with potted plants and carpets over the parquet floors and champagne that was sometimes sabered. And those visits were for Hermann Goring, who came all the time. He would redirect his entire military operation if he heard that there was new art that came in that he would want to see. So here's a photograph of an exhibition that was set up in the Jutpom during World War II. This is all looted art paintings. And then he would be shown paintings. He would hold them in his hand. He would sometimes smoke a cigar, and he would be presented art that he would decide whether he wanted it or not. And he really believed that he was, quote, the last Renaissance man. And he was collecting voraciously for his homes in Germany, including one called Hall. And so here is Bruno Lose, the art dealer I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, holding 2 Matisse paintings from the Paul Rosenberg collection. But Alfred Rosenberg, no relation to Paul, also came to visit the Jutpom Museum. So here is his arrival, get a sense of the pomp and circumstance. And here he is touring the looting operation. And then after artwork was selected, it would be crated and trucked straight out of the museum, usually to a train station where it would be loaded onto a train car. If it was Hermann Goring's, they would load it onto his personal train car or his personal train. So Bruno Lose, the man on the left of this slide, is the nemesis of Rose, Hermann Goring's art dealer, a very devious man in the Nazi party and also an art historian who claimed through the end of his life that he didn't steal anything and he was just a lowly art historian. But when they opened up his Swiss bank vault after he died, they found a very famous looted art painting and many other Impressionist paintings in his vault. And his boss was Kurt von Baer, whom I joke is a Nazi out of central casting. If you can kind of zoom in, you can see that he has one glass eye. It's the left eye. And he would sweep into the museum with long floor-length coats of wolf hair collar. And here he is in his World War I Red Cross uniform, posing for photographs that were taken in the Jutpom Museum. They did what we would call selfies today. Each Nazi person who worked in the museum would pose in front of artwork and such and get their photographs taken. And what did they do with modern art? Hitler only liked the old masters, things he could understand. So those are paintings by Vermeer, by Rembrandt, by Hans Holbein. So modern art by Picasso, Dali, Leger, Matisse, etc., was all stuffed into this one room in the Jeu de Paume called the Salle des Martyrs, the room of the martyr. And Rose was very, very concerned about this museum, about this room in the museum throughout the war. And her fears were very founded because, as I mentioned, the Nazis took 500 paintings, modern art paintings, and burned them in the summer of 1943. And sometimes people like to see some of the research process. So a lot of the materials came from the French National Archives, the French Diplomatic Archives. I had to use microfilm. I think I had to use microfilm since elementary school when we took a trip to the library to learn about how to use microfilm. And sometimes the boxes that I would get were so big and heavy, they would have to give me a cart. And one very, very important part of the book is actually about the story of Paul Rosenberg, the art dealer, the exclusive art dealer to Picasso, Matisse, Braque, and Leger, and his son, Alexander Rosenberg. It was very important for me to be able to tell the story of Rose, but within the context of art looting in France and what that meant on a personal level to the Jewish population. And so, with Paul Rosenberg's connection to modern art and his sons fighting in World War II, a very brave, amazing story. And the fact that his story intersects with Rose's story, and again, a way that Hollywood cannot write. This was a very, very important part of the story for me. And so every other chapter woven into Rose's story and what's happening with looted art is the story of the Rosenberg family. And the Rosenbergs are still looking for art that was stolen by the Nazis in World War II, a mission that is so noble and so moving. And you may occasionally read about their artwork being located. And this was the family gallery and home in Paris, 21 Rue La Boétie. The handsome man on the scooter in the front is my husband, who did scooter me around to a lot of locations that I needed to go, and he drove me around France. This was the inside of their art gallery. So this was the foyer in which you would enter, decorated with sculptures. And then inside, this is actually their private quarters, a staircase decorated with many famous artists' paintings that would go up to their private quarters. But this was the first floor of the gallery, this beautiful wood paneled gallery space that let in natural light, in which the modern artists would be shown. And then upstairs would be the Impressionists and painters like Van Gogh, real mainstays that of course would sell. And then, but Rosenberg was very, very interested in avant-garde modern art. And in a real dark twist, his not only was all of his art looted, but his house and gallery was taken over and turned into the Institute for the Study of Jewish Questions, a very dark propaganda outfit, supposedly, allegedly run by the French, but really bankrolled and backed by the Germans. And one of their big projects was to figure out how to deport the Jewish population from France. And the book also follows the movements of Alexander Rosenberg, his brave journey. He ends up volunteering and for de Gaulle's military and helps to liberate Normandy and Paris. So I'm going to end there to open it up to questions.
I would love to touch on this idea of like the continuity of this issue, right? Like this is a
Yeah,
story about World War II, but the ramifications of it are still being felt today.
absolutely.
You mentioned like the Rosenberg family in particular looking for art,
Hmm.
but you do hear these stories of like
Yes.
looted art coming up, and then also relatedly, like the question of museums and institutions that
Hmm.
have these things
Yes.
and like what that means for like the cultural
Yes.
field in general. If you could talk a
Y-
little bit about that.
Yes, of course. And on on the side, I also write about looted art stories, especially ones that I find particularly moving or interesting. So I've learned a lot about the legal structure and the frameworks around restitution that museums and places like Christie's and Sotheby's, each case, that how they work through it and what it means. And it's really, um, there's no international law about it. There was a big conference in 1999 called that put forth the Washington Principles, and that was to encourage countries to follow a set of principles regarding looted art. But really, unless your state or your country has a law that can be litigated against, it's very, very difficult and really case by case when these pieces of artwork come up. So one of the cases I've been following for a long time is the case of a Bizarro painting that was looted from the Cassiri family in Germany, who were major art dealers and publishers. And it was found in the late 90s, early maybe 2000, around that time period, hanging on a national museum in Spain. And so this case has wound its way up and down to Supreme Court twice and back through the American system. And the litigation is never really about the merits of the case. They have a picture of this painting on the wall of in Berlin in the 30s. They have a label that's on the back. It's about, in this case, which law should apply. Is it Spanish law? Is it American law? But in the meantime, it's inspired laws to be passed. So California passed this law just about a year ago, and that may be the linchpin that enables this case to be maybe resolved in their favor, because now the Supreme Court has said, no, you have to follow California law. So that was the most recent designation. So December 15th is a big day for that case. And yes, the same thing where you read about these stories all the time, whether it's art popping up. There was a huge incident recently in Argentina where a descendant of someone that worked very closely with Hermann Goring put her house up for sale and left up a painting that was looted. So that hit like every publication around the world, and really put looted art on the in the spotlight. So yes, and I think there's just much more work to be done. It's very hard for families to get their work back.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have a question kind of about process and research. So
Mhm.
if there's an anecdote about a very unexpected source that led you to other discoveries, any like
Yeah, I
particularly
mean,
good rabbit holes you found yourself in?
yes, so many. And I love talking about this. But since we might have an architectural crowd, I will talk about that chapter, what I mentioned, finding the unpublished chapter, because that really impacted when I could start the book. I really wanted to start in the summer of 1939 to build that tension of what's happening in Paris. It's like life is happy and gay, but also war might be coming. And then to be able to talk about the protection of art in World War II by France, and which Rose is a part of. But if we were missing what happened to her when Germany invaded Paris, like that's a very big hole. And so it took a while to find that. And I had heard that there was potentially a book that a man had put together but never published. And we were meeting with the head of a museum in Grenoble. And at the end, I think it's my husband who said, "Hey, have you heard about this book?" And the man froze and he said, "It's in this museum." And so I was
Amazing.
like, I'm coming back the next day, but then I had to he said, well, you need permission from the woman I mentioned, Jacqueline Bartolet, who's the head of the Rose Vallon Association. I was like, conveniently, I'm having lunch with her right now, actually, in an hour. And so by the time I got there, she said, heard you want to see the book. And so, but in addition, finding that, of course, led me to understand what her journey was outside of Paris. And so then I went to walk that path. Of course, she went by boat, but I could walk alongside it, along the Seine, in the industrial area. And I realized when I walked it that I had done my architectural studio when I studied in Paris at that site. So
Mm.
it was like only by walking did I realize like some of the buildings and how and I just couldn't believe it. That kind of like serendipity, that everything in your life often kind of comes together at some moments. And
Mhm.
so like I knew that area like the back of my hand, and I had seen that where I started was the beginning of that, but I didn't quite realize kind of where it was going to lead. And then I walked by this one building that I had written an article about. So that was great. And then um, everything just required just this kind of dogged persistence. I mentioned the smoking gun. That's the other kind of big discovery of the book about the fire. And I knew if I wanted to tell this book from Rosen's perspective, which is in a genre called narrative nonfiction, which means you are with the characters. And so um, I would need to find these documents. And so I discovered in the back of unrelated documents in a box, 4 notarized testimonials by the guards who worked in the museum, who all testified to say I was there and wrote in great detail, not just I was there and it was this date, but like one of them even said I was instructed by the guards, ordered by the German guards to light the bonfire. And so that to me was one of the most, I don't know, moving discoveries of the book, because she spent decades trying to prove later that this happened. She was attacked by the very Germans who had ordered that fire. I went back in time to trace like where does this doubt come from, and they spoke out to a German newspaper right after the war. I mean, right after she put this in her book. And so that is one of those moments where you feel like you can help the character you're writing about set the record straight, even
Mhm.
though she's not here with us anymore. And in
Yeah.
addition, it the material forms such vivid source material for the book.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of like writing it retroactively, like getting into this idea of like women being not taken seriously or discredited, and kind of trying to do justice to this person who was very serious and very well respected, and having her reputation tarnished. You kind of like went
Yes.
and did a little course
Right.
correction
And
there.
so, it's not just the Germans who were trying to tarnish her reputation. Post-war in France, she was famous in the initial years. She was awarded the Medal of Resistance, the Legion d'Honneur, you name it. Even the American Medal of Freedom she got because she was commissioned in both the US Army and the French Army, and was working on restitution for 8 years in Germany post-war. But then so she kept working on restitution when the world moved on. We were in the Cold War. She's trying to hold people to account still. There are people in France that had collaborated. Maybe some people in the museums had also collaborated. The the boss that I told you about at the beginning, who wouldn't hire her and wouldn't pay her, he ended up. One of my discoveries too was that he was a middleman for the Nazis dealing art in the
Mhm.
war, and that document was only in the U.S. archives, so the French didn't even really know about that. And then she discovered at some point that they took her book off the shelves. Uh, and one of the things that a researcher in France helped me find was that she was told by a very famous politician in France, Poncet, who was the ambassador to Germany before World War II. He warned her not to write the second part of her book, the sequel. And she, in turn, warned someone else who was thinking to write about his post war restitution work not to write about it. Basically, it was too hot. And so there
Mhm.
was an active effort to suppress her, to remove her from the record and to remove her voice. So, in addition to her being female, to being lesbian, many forces working against her, which is why she died completely in obscurity, and
Mhm.
almost nobody attended her funeral, which was held in the Invalides in Paris.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like you do such beautiful justice to her in this book by telling her story, but also, like you said, you're really contextualizing it. Like it is
Hmm.
this woman and like what she did and the path that she went down, but like within this like much bigger context and story, and weaving these
Yeah.
different people throughout really helps, I don't know, make it feel, I don't know, like you said, narrative nonfiction, like you're in it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and
And I hope that, when I read books like this, I always wonder what would I have done
mm,
in that scenario. And that's kind of what I wanted to show here, not just Rose, but like all the other characters and how they make decisions. And someone told me recently, like in a positive way, you humanize the Nazis. Like when we read about them, usually they're these like awful black and white characters. And what I show in this museum is that they're all making decisions based on what's happening to them. And yes, many of them
mm,
are very greedy and they're sensing that opportunity, but they've made that decision, like
mm,
given that context. And in some cases they try to help, right? They're not just they're full humans. and
mhm,
um I think it's very easy to judge in hindsight, for example, maybe some of the collaborators you'll read about, but what were they facing at that time? Like I can't say what I would
yeah,
have done if my children were being threatened. I don't
right.
know. I would like
Yeah.
to think that I would always make the moral choice, but
Yeah. And so what lessons do you think we can bring in from Rose's story, from this like greater story into the world today? I mean, obviously, like
yeah.
you said, like the looting issue is still very much like in the present day, but I'm wondering like through this process, I think anytime you dig into history and do
Hmm.
research, there are always these points of intersection where it's like, you know what, that we're not too far removed from these things. So I'm wondering if there was anything in the writing
Yeah.
of this that you're like, what should we be talking about today in
Hmm.
2025 that we can learn from
Yes.
Rose Valland in
Well,
the
okay.
1940s?
So first for Rose particularly, I hope people realize that like really anybody can be a hero. She was an unlikely hero. She was overlooked. And in moments of crisis and war, traits and skills that were really disdained or overlooked sometimes become extremely valuable, right? And so she was someone that knew how to blend into the background, but was very good at her job and taking notes and observing what's going on, and also had a kind of very deadpan personality. And so whereas that kind of hindered her job prospects before, now is super important and super critical. And then I think really looking carefully at sort of the language of power and how art is part, how art and architecture is really part of power imperialism, totalitarianism. Like it's really not a side thing. It's all
Mhm.
woven in, and it's all yeah, usually part of the ideology that's going on. And so we might say, oh, it's just art. Like, and I think
Mhm.
post-war that kind of happened too. Like, who do we hold to account? They wanted to get Goring and Alfred Rosenberg and those guys. And then when it came down to prosecuting people who had looted, they said, well, we kind of got the big guys, and Rose was
Mhm.
upset about that, and that's why she
Yeah.
appeared at Nuremberg. She appeared as a prosecuting witness for Bruno Loza, which is why he continued to hate her
Mhm.
later, because she knew how important it was to hold people who are pillaging cultural resources and cultural history to account. So I
Mhm.
think, yeah, understanding how art plays a role in politics.
Yeah, and cultural heritage, I think, as people who work in architecture and art and preservation,
Mhm.
it feels sometimes like separate. Like here we're doing this
Right.
thing, this is what we're doing, but it's
Hmm.
like I think something that I appreciated about your book was that it really does help like put that in context where these things are all connected. Like it is
Yeah.
very much a part of it. It's not a side thing. It's
Hmm.
very much part of this broader issue. And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that's something that, cultural heritage workers too, I think we need to be better about being like, we are a part of the story
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
It's not a
Yeah.
side character. We're,
Right. And not just looting, right? Protection of
mhm,
art. And
yes.
now it's not just war, it's climate change, and
Hmm.
what is every museum organization doing in case we have a sudden crisis. And I've written
Right.
about the protection of art in Ukraine, or how they didn't
Hmm.
really when Russia started to invade, and the ramifications of that. So that, or another superstorm, and what are we going to
Hmm.
do?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're just over time.
Okay,
But is there
great.
anything else that you would like to tell us about this book or last thoughts for this audience other than just like go get a copy. Go get a copy of
Please
the
get
book
a
and go read the
copy.
book.
You can get it on my website or anywhere you want to buy books. You can get an autographed copy from me, but there are autographed copies kind of like all around New York and other places. So
Mm.
I go to sign books whenever I pass by a bookstore. So yeah, my website is michelleyoungwriter.com.
Yeah. And if you don't also follow Untapped New York,
Oh
go do
yes,
that too, because
please, thank
there
you.
there are so many amazing secrets to discover. Michelle and her team has
Yes.
done like an amazing job highlighting them.
Oh, thanks.